Our story begins with a narration about a tale that started many years ago in the past when this world was still peaceful and beautiful. The world remained so until the fateful day when reality and fantasy emerged and merged in a great revolt, turning that world into something much akin to a game. Since that day, numerous dungeons, secret places, and new locations began to appear abundantly around the world, and as expected, countless hordes of monsters and various other creatures started to emerge alongside these places. Of course, the monsters and creatures attacked people, creating a new world on the brink of destruction and chaos. However, people had not given up on survival. They continued to struggle and persuade each other to survive and never let humanity be defeated by the monsters. Since the fateful day when the Great Revolt began many years ago, when monsters started to appear, people also began to awaken extraordinary powers and continued to evolve over time with their new genes and abilities. They gained the strength to confront the creatures plaguing the world, leading to a significant shift in modern jobs as people now prioritized survival above all else. And now, in the Central Park in Daocheng, just before the entrance to the forest sanctuary, a man continued to give his speech to all the people around, precisely about the changes in the world. He proceeded to say that despite all this, the remnants of monsters persisted because not everyone had the ability to face them. The professions of people in modernity were divided into three different categories: combat, support, and lifestyle. Despite the lifestyle profession constituting about 90% of the global population, the world continued to be protected by the other two classes, especially the combat class. Listening to this speech was our protagonist, Lin Changfeng, who during the lecture recalled his past. When he was still a child, they said that his resilience was just a waste compared to his sister's talent. They would take her and leave him behind because those who protected the world were those with the combat profession, not those who received the common lifestyle profession. Returning from the flashback to the present, other students around were commenting on Changfeng, one of the school's greatest geniuses, if not the greatest genius of all, who supposedly awakened a very rare profession and was also participating in the profession test that day, appearing entirely fearless. Suddenly, a girl burst from the crowd, complaining about the protagonist arriving so late, mentioning that the reason he took so long to appear among everyone else was that he ended up with a terrible profession and was embarrassed to show up. That girl was Qi Yanran, who had the profession of fire mage. Responding to her accusation, Changfeng said it wasn't because there was a terrible profession, but because there were only terrible people, so it was different. Yanran laughed at him and mocked the protagonist because supposedly he was a lonely guy and had no friendship there to gather, practically as if he were declining in life. Despite this, the protagonist didn't care at all and ignored her, only saying that he wasn't planning to team up with other people, which made Yanran draw attention to him because going alone to his first real battle was practically certain death. She knew that the best thing to do was always to form a team in advance so that she could return and take the next test more safely. Changfeng didn't care much about her concerns and replied that it wasn't a big deal because being in a team meant sharing your experience, which only made the experience of doing everything alone better. This made Yanran sigh in exhaustion because he was really a stubborn and tiresome person to deal with. Therefore, if something went wrong because of his actions, he should deal with it alone because she didn't want to get involved in his troubles. But she also told the protagonist that if he was willing to be a little more humble and less arrogant than he was being now, he could just come back and join Yanran because she could allow him to join her group of people. After all, she knew he was the only genius in Daocheng College who could match her, and it was better to do that than just team up with some other random person. As the two conversed and the surrounding students paid attention, some others began to complain. Despite Changfeng being a great genius, he awakened a summoning profession that couldn't be as strong as the abilities and professions of others. The protagonist's biggest problem, this significant gap, would become even clearer when he took the test and needed to assess his strengths. With this in mind, the students could finally start the great profession test now that the entrance to the secret realm was being opened and activated. When each of them took a step forward on the platform, they would be teleported to the perimeter area of the secret realm. It was explained that the time limit was 3 days, and as long as they could quickly reach level 3 and reach the minimum level for a professional in their respective areas, they could be officially qualified as monster hunters. Additionally, the students were reminded that the examination area was within the 3 outer layers, and crossing that boundary for the test would be extremely dangerous. With that, the profession test finally began. Right from the start, Changfeng ran ahead of everyone else, leaving everyone behind. Even Yanran was annoyed because the protagonist was acting competitive and taking the lead again. She was deeply bothered because since elementary school, he had always been at the top of the students advance in theoretical knowledge. Now, as a senior high school student, he continued to be several steps ahead of her, making it seem like she could never catch up. Other students saw practically the same things, impressed because the protagonist was too fast for their eyes to follow. This was remarkable because even if Changfeng's profession wasn't as good as others, his physical abilities were something to admire. As the first to reach the teleportation platform, the protagonist would naturally be the first to be sent directly to the forest sanctuary. Once the preparations for teleportation were ready, it was activated immediately, and everyone was sent to the location of the profession test. They were all directed to the forest sanctuary within its perimeter. While the teleportation was happening, the teachers wondered how many levels they could climb during that test, imagining that if one of them could reach at least level 5, it would be good enough to be worthwhile. Among them, they knew there was a girl named Qi Yanran, the only one they could take some time to pay attention to because she was worthy of their efforts. After all, fire mages were one of the rarest types of mages, versatile in both offensive and defensive areas, deserving to be considered one of the most important. Meanwhile, there was also Changfeng, who, on the day he acquired his profession, experienced something quite remarkable and worthy of being called a celestial phenomenon. The profession he acquired was that of a necromancer, seeming to be the only one of his kind documented within the professions. In other words, he was the only necromancer so far, and even though throughout history there were impressive cases where unique celestial phenomena occurred, curiously, the protagonist ended up becoming quite mediocre even with such a unique technique. Moreover, when they investigated the undead he summoned more deeply, their attributes were merely comparable to level 2 monsters, not much better than ordinary people one might encounter. Yet, it had been a long time since a prodigy like him had emerged in the Daoqing district. Meanwhile, Changfeng continued within the forest sanctuary, encountering a level 1 monster, a Xianling wild rabbit. It was the perfect opportunity to warm up at the beginning of the test. He drew his dagger and quickly killed the monster with a single move, leaving it lying on the ground all torn up. The system then notified the protagonist that by defeating the level 1 wild rabbit he received 5% experience. After defeating it, Changfeng sighed because at least he was able to deal with a level 1 monster like that without any problems, even though he was just a professional who had recently awakened his new abilities. In the world they lived in, when everyone turned 18, they could enter the tower to acquire a profession, gaining the opportunity to change their previous professions for a new one. And as soon as they acquired a new profession, there were only two choices for those with a newly acquired profession: either continue as ordinary people in their previous lives as if nothing had happened, or participate in the test to become a qualified monster hunter. In this case, Changfeng decided to become a professional not because he had some kind of noble patriotic spirit, nor because continuing with his profession could enable him to acquire a large sum of money. Instead, it was because he witnessed his parents being recruited for military services for the country and never returning since then. Additionally, his sister was forcibly taken from him due to her talent, while he himself was just a weak person with no skills. At that moment, he felt his own weakness directly and realized that in that world, laws couldn't always protect people around, and therefore, he needed to gain strength to earn some kind of recognition. While exploring the forest sanctuary, he soon encountered a level 2 gray squirrel, making him worry because the monster levels were quickly increasing. Changfeng thought it was a bit too fast, considering the information he had. Supposedly, monsters in the secret realm should be divided between regions and not appear so rapidly or in such varied levels. The protagonist immediately realized that dealing with a level 2 monster alone wouldn't be so easy, so he decided to use his necromancer ability to summon a level 1 undead to face the monster. But despite summoning an undead, several other monsters began to accumulate around him, leaving him worried because there were still more of them, and they were in a group, especially because they were all level 2. Changfeng thought about how facing so many level 2 opponents on the first day of the profession test wasn't something everyone could do so easily. Still, the protagonist could summon more undead, so he wouldn't be in so much danger. At this moment, the scene cuts, and we start to see the moment when Changfeng had gone to the tower to acquire his profession. The students who witnessed that moment laughed because his acquired ability was really weak. At first, they were all impressed and even excited because he had suddenly awakened a super rare profession. However, despite being something new, he only managed to acquire a rather mediocre profession. In the end, no one would want to team up with him, and it was better for them to find other people to gain more experience and strong individuals they could rely on without risking running into problems. At that time, he tested his ability by summoning a level 1 beginner undead with a combat power of 5 points, but everyone continued laughing at Changfeng because that undead had combat power similar to an ordinary person. Moreover, summoned creatures consumed a significant amount of mana, so a person like him would always be better off alone than in a group. Not only that, but they also mocked the protagonist's desire to enter Tsinghua University, saying that instead of becoming a monster hunter, he should try his luck just stealing other people's loot or taking a darker path to level up. Among all these people, Yanran was obviously filled with anger because they were all mocking her childhood friend, and she was ready to shut them up using her powers as a fire mage. Still, one of the teachers tried to stop her before an even greater chaos could ensue. But even hearing all that, the protagonist didn't care at all about what they thought of him or how they saw him. Just like the people who took his sister away from him just because of her promising abilities, those students were always the type to judge people superficially and nothing more. Furthermore, Changfeng wasn't just a summoner-type necromancer. Looking at his professional profile, despite having a current total of 4 undead he could summon, there were other available abilities as well. One such ability was Spirit Erosion, which allowed him to launch an attack up to 5 meters away that could suppress the consciousness of his target. There was also another secret ability that needed to be unlocked at level 6 called Sovereign Awakening. Thus, the protagonist wasn't merely a summoner of undead but was, in fact, the sovereign of the undead. Thanks to this, he could summon several of his undead at once. By summoning all 4 of his undead, the protagonist quickly killed the 3 surrounding level 2 monsters, allowing his experience to reach 100% and elevating him to level 2. Nevertheless, something caught Changfeng's attention because gray squirrels shouldn't have combat power superior to that of his undead. What impressed him even more was that this particular monster not only had superior power but also began to metamorphose, gaining wings even though it was just a common level 2 monster. This made him think that perhaps this particular monster had evolved during the battle. So, Changfeng sends his undead towards it again, thinking about how normally level 2 monsters that didn't appear in the vicinity were suddenly working together in that way and were even evolving into elite monsters, all within a simple test, which was a bit much for those who were still beginning to train their skills, making it seem a bit too intense. Now that he knew he would need to train and kill those evolved elite monsters, if 3 undead were not enough, he would bring even more. Changfeng put 6 undead into play to face that monster, which impressively continues to dodge attacks, but as it is cornered in the middle of the battle, it starts to go after the summoner. The protagonist finds a quite intelligent strategy for a mere level 2 monster, even though it's an elite one. However, even if it had approached him with the intention of winning the fight, it was still checkmate because he could very well win alone using his other ability. Changfeng uses his ability, which is Spiritual Erosion, quickly forcing the target to consciously submit to him. But before the effective power of his ability, a mark appears on the monster's forehead and its head explodes, practically self-destructing. Changfeng knew that his Spiritual Erosion ability could suppress the consciousness of a target within 5 meters, but it seemed that something similar to it was already inside the monster's mind from the beginning. Even though he feared it after using his technique to force it to submit, it still refused to do so and self-destructed. Anyway, the system notifies Changfeng that he managed to defeat the level 4 monster, and deciding to leave that aside, the protagonist decides to focus on his task of quickly reaching level 6 to unlock his new ability. At the same time, he wanted to become stronger to reach his sister and make up for his past weakness, and for that he would make the maximum effort. In parallel, Yenran's group was also facing the monsters, and one of her companions used a war shield to push the target away, even though it was a much larger and clearly more powerful monster than expected, sending the shield bearer away with the pressure of the attacks coming his way. Despite this, there was still a person in the group to buff the tank, allowing him to draw the monster's attention and protect himself without getting hurt, while Yenran prepared her attack as a fire mage, punching toward her target and quickly defeating it, allowing her whole group to defeat the level 3 armored boar. With that, Yenran's experience reached 100%, allowing her to reach level 2. The group, consisting of those 3 people, gathers after the victory and they comment among themselves that it took a lot of effort, but they finally managed to defeat that monster, making their small group quite efficient even against level 3 monsters on the first day, something they could be proud of. Nevertheless, fortunately, they still had a large quantity of potions that they could use in case something more serious happened, and besides, there was a person in their group who was a healer, so they wouldn't have to worry too much about that kind of thing and could stick to their plans for a long time. Despite this, Yenran was confident that facing level 3 monsters in the future would be nothing because just before the test ended, she might be able to easily confront a level 5 monster. Hearing this, her level 2 teammate, who was a healing mage named Xiaoyan, commented that the higher the level of a monster, the greater the difficulty in facing it, so their strategy should adapt to the monster's level as the difficulty increased. She explained that for a level 5 monster, Yanran would need at least a level 5 ability that could cause significant damage and at least 1 or 2 level 4 supports. Their other teammate, Ajay, who was also level 2 and a battle shield user, but currently all he had and needed now was to reach the acceptable level to get stronger, which was level 3, as his family was counting on his help to continue surviving now. While discussing this, suddenly the ground starts to shake, making them worried because it seemed like a sudden earthquake, but soon they realized that it was not actually a natural earthquake but something big approaching and causing that strong tremor in the earth. Soon, they realized that it is a gigantic monster the size of a mountain called a stone monkey, but it is level 6, and obviously, this worries them because it is way beyond what they could handle alone at their current levels. The team then prepares to run away from it because if it targeted them, it was certain they would lose their lives against such a powerful monster. But while Yanran and Ajay fled, Xiaoyan ended up falling to the ground because her legs weakened and trembled with nervousness and fear, unable to move with how shocked she was by what was before her eyes. Immediately, because she stayed behind, the stone monkey notices Xiaoyan's presence and starts going after her, and of course, her companions come back to help her. Ajay quickly grabs his shield to defend his friend from the monster, thinking to himself that he shouldn't fear it because it was something any professional would face, and so he needed to do it and summon the courage to face such a monster. Ajay recalls how he bid farewell to his parents, telling them not to worry because once he officially became a professional, the government would provide subsidies and, with them, a considerable amount of money that would be sent to his parents. Still, his parents' top priority was always the safety of their son, but Ajay assured them that considering his equipment and his large shield, he would always be safe and nothing could happen. Now that he had made that promise to return safe and sound to his parents and ensure a good life for them, Ajay couldn't retreat now because, in the end, the world was being protected precisely by those 10% of people who were professional fighters, so he stood perfectly still to protect Xiaoyan. When the blow from that giant monster hit them, Yanran could only scream her colleagues' names worry because they could have been seriously injured, but when the dust cloud disappeared, it quickly revealed that the blow from the great monster did not hit him but directly hit a undead that protected them with its side. Ajay and Xiaoyan are shocked by what appeared so quickly before their eyes, unable to recognize what protected them until finally Changfeng himself appears, leaving Yanran impressed because he simply appeared there so suddenly. Hearing Yanran's question about why he appeared so suddenly, the protagonist responds that the meaning of a professional's role is precisely to protect those they care about using their own strength. But not only was Changfeng able to protect the two students from the level 6 monster's attack, but he also used his undead and quickly defeated it with a mere blow, impressing Yanran. Still, it was not a complete defeat because the level 6 monster began to retreat back into the forest, but even before Yanran could confirm if that thing that stopped the level 6 monster was one of Changfeng's summons, he had disappeared just as suddenly as he appeared. Yanran starts to think to herself if the creature with a scythe, a reaper, was not one of Changfeng's summons as a necromancer, precisely the one he had summoned on the day of the profession acquisition ceremony. Still, it was impressive to her that Changfeng could defeat a level 6 monster so easily, making her wonder if that guy was hiding his true potential and strength from the beginning and just pretended it wasn't a big deal from the start, which only made her more frustrated because it seemed like she was falling behind him all the time, and now more than ever Yanran wanted to discover Changfeng's true level. Anyway, when the protagonist disappears from her line of sight, Yanran runs towards her colleagues asking if they are okay, and they agree and just tell her that they are whole, but they would still need a new pair of pants. That is, he was teasing Xiaoyan that she would have soiled herself before dying to that huge monster. Anyway, putting the jokes aside, Yanran asks if the two of them saw Changfeng do anything, and Ajay replies that yes because they saw him walking towards the stone that left, but he was chasing after that giant monster that ended up escaping. Xiaoyan says that it was a level 6 monster, but still, it was seriously injured by a creature that looked a lot like a reaper from the movies, making her wonder if the protagonist was going after him to kill him, and Ajay agrees because it seemed to be the case, being the perfect opportunity to gain a lot of experience by defeating a level 6 enemy. Hearing this, Yanran asks if her two companions were present on the day of the profession transition ceremony when Changfeng got his profession, and if they even remembered what it was. When Ajay and Xiaoyan begin to think that he was a necromancer, a summoner of undead, the realization quickly hits, and Yanran confirms that yes, most likely, now Changfeng was much stronger than they could ever imagine to be able to summon an undead like that. Meanwhile, Changfeng was chasing after the stone monkey that was escaping, knowing perfectly well that high-level monsters were always subject to stricter spatial restrictions. Therefore, level 6 monsters could not leave a certain area within that boundary, but still, there was the monster, not only trying to leave that limit area but clearly attempting to hide from Changfeng. The protagonist asks him who gave him that command, but of course, a monster would not answer him because they didn't speak. However, it was also a good opportunity to test the upgraded version of his spiritual erosion ability. Changfeng uses the memory reading ability on the level 6 monster, and with that, the protagonist becomes able to see the exact moment when they had awakened the monster from its contract. This had been done in the past by a group of skilled humans who were capable enough to break old contracts, and one of the humans who had that ability was a person named Shanchao. Exiting the monster's mind reading, the creature asks if Changfeng was responsible for killing many of its generals, which makes the protagonist realize that the person behind all of this was actually that level 5 human named Shanchao, apparently because he had some kind of ability to influence the minds of monsters. Still, that stone monkey knew it was a technique that couldn't work on him for so long because he was a king-level monster. With that, Changfeng challenges the stone monkey to defeat it and thus gain a lot of experience in the process, which makes the monster laugh in his face because the protagonist thought he was good enough to go around killing anything that appeared in front of him when he, a level 6 monster, was clearly the one in charge. The stone monkey says that his revival plan was slowly getting complete and soon, when he could leave that place, he would invade the human world and use it and its companions as part of his food. Of course, that provocation made the protagonist angry, quickly ordering his reaper to split the monster in two with its side. Changfeng says he really hated it when people treated him as if they were mocking him, but in the end, even after killing the level 6 stone monkey, the person who was controlling it through that symbol on its forehead mentions that it wouldn't be enough to make the protagonist a worthy opponent because soon, when it could step on those lands again, it would kill him without any doubt. For now, Changfeng was able to defeat a level 6 stone giant, thus reaching level 6 himself with the amount of experience received, and also, as he reached the necessary level, he was able to acquire the Sovereign Awakening ability. Changfeng uses that ability immediately, causing a dark mist to spread around, and even Yanran's team, which was nearby, began to wonder what was happening and were just trying to be careful with whatever was around to cause that bizarre scenario. Soon, Yanran and the others end up seeing what Changfeng had managed to awaken with his new ability, a person known as the Emperor who was atop a large creature. With the awakening of the Emperor's arrival, the skies darkened and filled with purple lightning and thunder, leaving people shocked at how the weather changed completely out of nowhere, as if what was above the clouds now was a giant dragon, looking more like some kind of monster invasion. People continued to be shocked looking at the sky, imagining that maybe it couldn't be a monster invasion because the mountains and seas were full of powerful individuals and it was impossible for them to get through. But still, some people were afraid and considering the idea of seeking shelter in the city to protect themselves from whatever was approaching, causing that frightening storm in the sky. Watching that was a girl who realized that it was nothing more than a second awakening, and she knew that her colleagues from Daiching's school were not as bad as they seemed at first, but still, it was a pity for her that they needed to leave that city because otherwise, she would love to meet the person going through that second awakening. As that unknown girl left, the teachers who had been coordinating the profession test started to get worried because that was the first appearance of an individual double awakening within the Daiching branch, and so they wanted to find the person going through that awakening as quickly as possible. As soon as the second awakening was confirmed, they could finally hold their heads high and behave before other branches as if they were on the same level as them. But the professor who was responsible for trying to find the student who had achieved a double awakening of abilities says that what was happening was strange because normally the spatial stone would activate automatically and quickly so that it could be used to go to the secret realm. However, this time there was something blocking its opening. The professor tried all possible methods to make it possible, but the secret realm couldn't open a passage, and the data was not responding. This made the professor suspect that the reason for this was that supernatural energy fluctuations leaking from the second awakening were temporarily preventing the secret realm's opening. Still, it seemed too serious to be just temporary, and he feared that the secret realm might now be permanently closed, no matter how many efforts he made to open the entrance. Not only was Changfeng's double awakening happening, but simultaneously, the final sacrifice ceremony was fully complete, and now the monsters were ready to hunt humans without any hesitation, wanting to leave none of them escaping from their hands. So, the leader of the monsters ordered his servants to proceed to hunt them because none of them would ever disturb serve them again, and they could capture all those humans who had been causing harm to them for so long. Meanwhile, a trio of students was in the secret realm forest hunting and leveling up, and they even discussed how they quickly reached level 3, praising one named Zhang who had a really powerful profession. Zhang mocks because everyone always fawns over Qi Yanran and her team as if they were the most powerful of all, but little did they know that he, Zhang Sam, was just playing a wolf in sheep's clothing within that group of students. As they walked in the forest, they suddenly encountered a giant level 6 ogre, becoming scared and shocked because such a powerful monster shouldn't be nearby. But not only them, but several other people in the forest began to be attacked by various high-level monsters, not understanding why so many monsters like those were suddenly appearing even without entering the deepest part of the forest where there should be those high-level monsters. This made all humans start calling for help because they were getting beaten by each of the high-level monsters, but no one could go help them. This was because on the transportation platform to the secret realm, the scientist professors still didn't know what was happening for the portals to the secret realm to remain closed. Still, one of them knew that there was a strange force inside the secret realm blocking the spatial stones from opening to that specific space. One of the scientists says that the spatial stones were the only means of opening to the secret realm, which meant that the students who went to the other side now had no way to get out and no one could enter to help them, which worried them because they would be losing a great genius inside those gates, even if it was just the beginner's secret realm. But at the moment, the scientist professors had nothing they could do to help them, and could only hope that the people inside could defeat whoever was causing that interference so that they could help them get out. And inside the secret realm, when the sovereign awakening was complete, Changfeng's profession changed to undead sovereign. Inside his mind, the protagonist begins to hear a voice saying that he obtained a unique divine level technique called sovereign power and another divine level ability called indomitable will. With these two new abilities, the voice begins to explain that the effects of the sovereign power technique allow Changfeng to summon all entities under his command to gain 10 times more power in amplification. Furthermore, his abilities would improve alongside his own level. The other ability, indomitable will, would transfer the damage suffered by the user to the summoned creatures, but as the creatures the protagonist summoned were undead and had an infinite number of them, this basically made him immortal. Hearing those words, Changfeng becomes confused and asks who is talking to him, but the voice just continues to say that he is the spirit of the divine level occupying the system, and each person who awakens a divine level profession will automatically be linked with a spirit, and the name of the voice interacting directly with the protagonist is now called the fallen angel. Changfeng asks if other people can hear the voice of the angel, and he replies that only the sovereign of the undead is able to hear his voice and communicate with him through their thoughts. He asks if there is any command or something the angel can do, and he replies that through Changfeng's permissions, he could search for life within a radius of 500 meters, and taking advantage of the opportunity that he mentioned this ability, he asks if he could use the ability now to see along that distance. Understanding that the permissions were directly connected to the levels that Changfeng would attain, he allows the angel to use the scan to see through that distance of 500 meters. After completing the scanning, the voice says that there were signs of life in that direction, totaling 4 individuals. The protagonist knew that 3 of them should be Qi Yanran's group, and the other was still unknown, but it might mean that Yanran again encountered some kind of enemy on her way. Changfeng asks if the angel could be a bit more specific in its analysis, but it responds that it was unable to specify the characteristics of the one it detected. However, the protagonist could use the power of the vengeful undead spirit to conduct reconnaissance details. Changfeng asks if the vengeful undead spirit is some kind of undead that he released to use now that he has leveled up, possibly changing the level of his current undead. Changfeng summons his undead and instructs them to reconnoiter the area. As he gains some time, the protagonist decides to test another of his new abilities. Changfeng uses the perception sensor ability, allowing him to see what his undead were seeing. Unlike before when he could only give common commands to his undead, now he could directly project his spirit into his undead and share their bodies. In other words, those undead could become his new avatars while his true body was elsewhere. While Changfeng used the undead to move around and conduct reconnaissance, he soon sees that there is a part of the forest destroyed and on fire, making him wonder if that is a bad sign and probably originates from Yanran and her team, who might have engaged in some battle some time before. Changfeng instructs the fallen angel to search for signs of life nearby, and it responds that there are 0 signs of life nearby, leaving the protagonist puzzled because literally half a minute ago there were 4 people and suddenly all of them disappeared so quickly. Changfeng begins to wonder if they just left suddenly, because it was strange that such a thing would happen when their movements shouldn't be so fast as to disappear in the blink of an eye. Anyway, he knew that even if he couldn't yet know who won that battle, it should still be possible to find traces of where they had been some time ago to deduce how far they had gone. Still, there were no footsteps left behind on the ground, as if they had literally been swept in the air and disappeared. Chang Feng didn't want to believe that Yan Ran and her team simply disappeared so suddenly, because something else must have happened for it to unfold that way, making him think of all the different possibilities, such as them encountering some monster or creature that caused that outcome in the battle. Still, Yan Ran had a rare profession as a fire mage, and while running through the forest in search of any sign, Chang Feng continues to think about how there should only be low-level monsters around the secret realm, and obviously, they shouldn't have any difficulty dealing with them considering the level of their team. Unless something different had happened, and soon Chang Feng remembers the words of the being controlling the stone monkey about how he intended to return to finish off all humans without any hesitation, which quickly leads him to conclude that probably that guy must have returned and caused that chaos. Chang Feng thinks that considering the way he was talking, it seemed that the secret realm was probably really under his command, and now he wanted to reign over the human realm too through his revival plan. Still, it all seemed too vague because there should be other goals behind it. He considers that if his goal were the humans inside the secret realm, sooner or later that being would seek Chang Feng's location, and considering that the enemy was perfectly hidden while he remained open as a target, it was only a matter of time before they appeared again to attack him. Therefore, the best thing to do at the moment was to take the initiative as soon as possible. With that in mind, the protagonist summons more and more of his undead, instructing them to clear the entire secret realm, not letting any secret entrance pass so that they could walk through the entire territory, and every monster found should be killed. Cutting to the scene, we see that Yanran's group, along with several other students and people, were gathered in one place. Ajay began to awaken his colleague Xiaoyan, who was unconscious and confused about what was happening, but soon Yanran responds that she also didn't know exactly what was happening because they awakened not long ago too, but at least they were confirming if none of them were injured somewhere. People around were equally worried about their team members and began checking if any of them were injured in any way in the process. However, they realized that they had apparently been teleported to that strange place. Soon, a loud voice starts speaking to all of them, welcoming the humans who have just arrived and leaving them completely confused because they couldn't see who was suddenly talking to all of them. But it doesn't take long for the space they were in to shrink, and they find themselves trapped inside a pillar in the middle of a strange place with several monsters watching them. In front of them, a large and strange statue appeared, but soon the voice that was speaking to them starts talking again, being the owner of the voice known as the Origin of Disaster, the king-level dungeon boss. The dungeon boss says that the place where the humans are now is the altar of the guardian statue for sacrifices, and, of course, humans should raise their heads and understand their surroundings because clearly they are the ones to be properly sacrificed. All the students are shocked because there is an unbelievable number of monsters around them, and soon they also sense the presence of that dungeon boss and wonder if he should be the boss of that realm. This is quite confusing because they shouldn't be able to encounter the dungeon boss so early, especially when they should be in the middle of the profession examination. But ignoring their doubts, the dungeon boss says that humans have always entered their territory for long decades, and again, hunted the people living in their realm, and, of course, the dungeon boss was fed up with that repeating over such a long time and wanted to take revenge for everything they had done over the decades. This leaves all the students frightened because the dungeon monster seemed clearly full of anger, but he begins to mock the humans' faces and says that as he was a kind boss, if they went to the altar and swore loyalty to the dungeon boss, he would not only forgive their sins but also ensure the power of the disaster's origin, which was nothing more than the mark on the forehead of each of the monsters around. The students start talking among themselves about the origin of the disaster, which is the name of the monster marked in history books known as the one who turned thousands of humans into his contracted servants. But some of them couldn't believe that the dungeon boss could really be the origin of the disaster because that was a monster in history books from a century ago. Still, the dungeon boss says that he himself created the altar where the disaster lord was born, but now those humans who were there should take a step towards the altar to gain the power of the disaster lord's contract, and nothing would happen to them. Yanran starts saying that it was senseless, questioning the reason why humans needed to treat a monster as their master. She comments that if they wanted so much power, the monsters themselves should go to the altar to get that power and not throw all the hardship onto the humans. Hearing this, the dungeon boss says that he himself has already obtained a portion of the contract power as well as all the monsters around, but that was only 1,000th of the true power of the reborn Disaster Lord. Humans would only be able to comprehend the true power running in their veins now if they made a contract with the Disaster Lord, especially because the Disaster Lord himself was also a human. The students are shocked by that revelation, and it just seemed like a big joke from that monster, and they keep asking how that could be possible and why a human would turn against their own kind and make them become their servants. This makes the dungeon boss laugh because hypocrisy and envy were part of the strength and were also part of what humans were. The monster says that thanks to humans' inability to see how brilliant the Disaster Lord was, now the race of monsters and demons had gained a talented genius like him. Pressuring the humans once again, the dungeon boss then asks what they intended to do now that they had only two choices: live or die. Then, one of the humans turns and starts climbing the stairs, only to be stopped by another student asking where he thought he was going. The guy responds that he would climb the stairs of the altar because as long as he got stronger and that chance existed, there was no reason not to try and survive. Suddenly, a big explosion occurs in the middle of the staircase, and the two guys arguing turn to look at Yenran, who calls him an idiot for even considering that possibility. She says that humans and monsters were incompatible with each other, and the chances of monsters bringing humans there just to get stronger were clearly a hoax because probably something much bigger and hidden was being kept from them. In other words, it was clearly a trap, and yet that student seemed to want to climb the stairs. The guy responds with a laugh, saying that becoming strong was something that everyone with powerful professions would naturally become someday, people like Yenran who awakened with incredible abilities and were geniuses. However, someone like him, who only had luck in combat as a mediocre swordsman with no potential or abilities beyond the average, certainly had no future. He says that even if he survived in that dungeon, his future would continue to be that of a mediocre to bad person if he didn't end up dying in the process. Still, now that a chance appeared for him to change his fate from a weak and incompetent person, even if it was a trap, it was still a possibility he would have to change and was willing to risk his life for this goal of getting stronger. Yenran even thinks about trying to say something to stop that student, but Ajay says it was no use because he certainly didn't intend to listen to them, so they just let that guy climb the stairs as he wanted. Then, the guy climbs to the top of the platform and starts talking that he was never a lucky person in life or won anything, but now it could be the ideal opportunity to finally become a great protagonist by receiving power from the Disaster Lord's altar. Oh, how deluded the extra becomes. The dungeon boss starts laughing as he sees the altar statue begin to release a dark red mist that supposedly would give power to the human. The guy mentions that he was feeling the energy flowing through his body and his limbs began to change into a monstrous form, slowly transforming him into a fallen level 7 demon swordsman, shocking all the humans because he really seemed to have become much stronger now, but in the process, he had to sacrifice his humanity to become one of the monsters. Now that he had officially become a demon, the dungeon boss says the next step was for him to prove his loyalty to the great Disaster Lord, and to do that, he just had to do the obvious, which was just to kill all the humans present. And with that, the demon begins to draw his sword, completely enchanted by the power he acquired thanks to the contract with the Disaster Lord. The students, trying to call the name of the demon who was formerly Lu Liang, begin to try to wake him up, saying that the monsters destroyed his homeland, but now he seemed to want to betray everyone just to get stronger and join the side that took everything from him, and obviously, the professional monster hunters would never allow that. While the humans tried to convince Liang, the dungeon boss insisted that he do what he was told and kill them all, and soon a girl tried to talk to Liang, saying that her father was from the Chinese office, and if he dared to help those monsters, she would definitely tell her father, and that was just a warning for him to step back and not kill people of his own race, because he should just kill the demons and find a way to get them all out of there. But instead of convincing him, that only made Liang even more tempted to kill them, making him jump in front of the girl while saying that she really didn't understand the situation they were in, and so he simply kills her with one blow, laughing because he always hated people who were arrogant like that, but now he had the strength to be considered the boss there and the most powerful among them. Seeing that Liang wasn't willing to reconsider, all the students started wanting to run away because they knew they would end up being killed if they stayed there for more time, especially now that he seemed to have gone completely mad for power. Yenran says they shouldn't run like that because they could only cooperate to fight against Liang to survive, but the students weren't at all convinced because he was a level 7 monster, and certainly they wouldn't be able to defeat such an aberration. Still, no matter how much they tried to escape because the place they were in was a dead end, so soon when the students started pushing each other, some people people started falling and dying from the fall, but in the process, whoever was closer to Liang would also end up losing their lives because he was killing everyone without hesitation, thirsty for the power he had always wanted as a swordsman. While Liang killed each of the people there without any remorse, even before he could hit more people, Yanran interrupted using her fire mage powers, which clearly only made Liang even more revolted because he always hated her condescension in front of others, always seeming to think she was more important and stronger. Liang goes after her, mocking her because just because she got a rare profession, she thought she was a great genius, but compared to him, who was level 7, she could hardly do anything now being level 2, so he attacks her with his new powers to kill her. Yanran and Liang start exchanging blows, but with the level difference, Yanran ends up being thrown away, being held just a little by her colleagues Xiaoyan and Ajai. In the process, Yanran ended up using the Phoenix armor, which was a rare level 6 defense item. However, Liang mocked her because it wasn't enough to stop him. Now, facing his new power, none of them would be able to confront him in battle. Xiaoyan asked what they should do because they clearly stood no chance against Liang. Yanran simply told her friends to step back because she would buy time until rescue came. Xiaoyan replied that everyone had been captured and no one could come to their rescue. Still, Yanran believed that Changfeng could still come to their rescue since he wasn't among the captured humans. Speaking of Changfeng, he had just sensed that one of his undead had crossed a barrier somewhere. He immediately understood that this was the reason he couldn't find anything even after searching every corner of the dungeon. Now he knew that everyone was hiding deep within the secret realm. It seemed that whoever was manipulating everything was also inside. Fortunately, having reached level 8, Changfeng acquired a new ability called Mind Corrosion. With a mental mark, he could see the location of monsters, the dungeon boss, and what was happening within the barrier. The protagonist left a mark on a monster, which returned to report to the dungeon boss that a level 8 human was outside the barrier, killing all the monsters. This angered the dungeon boss, as it led to the loss of many of his people. However, inside the barrier, with the death of the humans, the critical time would soon arrive. Liang was completely absorbed in his task of killing everyone, and eventually, all sacrifices would be made for the true awakening of the Lord. With Liang driven mad by power, killing mercilessly, Yanran continued trying to protect some people. She wondered how he had become such a monster, not only on the outside but also on the inside. They were still waiting for rescue, even though Yanran couldn't protect everyone, and only 4 of them remained. Yanran herself was at her limit, almost losing consciousness due to her weakness. She fell to the ground, contemplating how she wouldn't be able to meet Changfeng again or surpass him as she had always strived to do. Just when she was about to be killed by Liang, a sudden explosion occurred at the top of the hideout, grabbing everyone's attention. Changfeng had arrived, apologizing for being late as he dealt a blow to Liang. The undead pierced Liang's chest with a scythe, causing him to drop his weapon. The protagonist landed amidst the scene with bodies scattered around, resembling a true massacre. Yanran's entire group was shocked to see Changfeng suddenly appear. As Changfeng investigated what had happened, he realized that he had arrived much later than he should have, failing to save those people. Now, with only Yanran's group and another girl remaining, Changfeng said he would leave Yanran, who had fainted from exhaustion, in Xiaoyan's care while he dealt with matters. The dungeon boss commented on the protagonist being just a level 5 human, mocking the idea that Changfeng could think of facing and killing the great successor of the Disaster Lord. In response, the protagonist mocked the monster again, infuriating him. The dungeon boss ordered his monster companions to attack the protagonist, and they began preparing to jump on Changfeng. Hearing this, Ajai told Changfeng that even though he was strong, the numerical advantage was too great to overcome, and it would be almost impossible. The protagonist replied that he wasn't fighting alone. Ajai got excited, thinking he was counting on him for the battle, but the protagonist explained that he meant his own undead servants were ready to tear apart each of the monsters around them. Changfeng summoned several of his undead at once, practically a legion of them, and had them confront the demons and monsters heading their way. Ajai commented that those high-level monsters didn't seem to stand a chance against the protagonist's servants. Changfeng responds that things weren't as simple as he had now found the same mark on the heads of the previous monsters he encountered. Seeing the dungeon boss, he imagined him to be the mastermind behind everything, and killing him would end it all. However, from the dungeon boss's reaction and words, Changfeng knew he was just the successor, which seemed like a trap. It felt strange because the dungeon boss had put so much effort into capturing humans and causing chaos. Yet, when Changfeng killed Liang with a single blow, supposedly a crucial part of the dungeon boss's plans, he showed no discomfort or anger. Ajai inquires about the mark mark, and Chang Feng theorizes that they didn't need a true successor like Liang to do the dirty work, just a body capable of withstanding the full power of the Disaster Lord when reborn. Chang Feng speculates that the dungeon boss might plan to use the mark to indirectly control the power of the Disaster Lord. Just as he thinks that, an attack directly targets the protagonist, hitting him hard and throwing Ajay away. Xiaoyan immediately becomes concerned for both of them, especially Chang Feng, who starts coughing up blood. However, the dungeon boss praises him for being a clever human and confirms Chang Feng's assumption. Over the years, the dungeon boss sought a way to attain the complete power of the Disaster Lord and pass it to someone to use it to his advantage. The power from the contract had no restrictions, and as long as he had it, he could make all life on Earth bow before him. Nevertheless, to achieve his goals and obtain the complete contract for the power of the Destruction Lord, he needed to absorb the powers of each contracted servant. The more contracts, the more powerful his final power would be. If he completed a full contract with someone, it was unfortunate because the person would be completely lost to the great power. Until that day, he had been looking for a way to overcome that and fully acquire that significant percentage of power for himself. To achieve this, the dungeon boss used a large number of contractors and their powers, especially through the marks left on humans who went to the altar to make their contract. Once they lost control, their mark activated. The dungeon boss taunts Chang Feng because he wouldn't be able to witness the rebirth of the great power of the Lord. When he overcame the dungeon's restrictions, he would officially enter the human world as promised. Ajay and the others are shocked because the monster had just landed a powerful blow on Chang Feng, clearly affecting him with a blow strong enough to almost kill him. At this moment, the dungeon boss tells all his demon servants to offer their powers, preparing to fulfill his plan. However, before this could happen, a voice comes from one of Chang Feng's undead, understanding that killing the dungeon boss would make the mark disappear completely. The dungeon boss immediately realizes that Chang Feng himself was the one speaking and is puzzled as to how he hadn't died even after taking that blow to the chest. What happened was that the protagonist activated his monarch's authority ability to disperse the effects of the blow in his body. Then, attacking the dungeon boss, he also activates his ability to increase the buff of his attack all at once, ready to kill the dungeon boss with a single blow. With the strike, the dungeon monster is split into two pieces without a moment for him to comprehend what had happened. Still, he is surprised because he can't even imagine where such power came from. He asks Chang Feng this question, and the protagonist responds that his power comes from a great emperor, something he couldn't even fathom how grand it really was. Finally, Chang Feng's main body rises, leaving everyone shocked because he was completely whole despite the blow he took earlier. Rising again, Chang Feng declares that he would officially become the great emperor of the undead, taking their power. After defeating the dungeon boss, he sees a floating stone and asks the fallen angel if it was left behind by the boss they just defeated, but the fallen angel denies it because it wasn't an item left by him. Analyzing the type of energy emanating from the stone, the protagonist realizes that it seemed to come from the power of the undead themselves. The fallen angel explains that the item had a level that exceeded his authority, so he couldn't scan and see what it really was. But before they could discuss the item further, Ajay suddenly warns Chang Feng to be careful because out of nowhere, Yang rises with blood in his eyes to confront the protagonist. Chang Feng complains that he had completely forgotten about Liang. Liang strikes the ground when the protagonist dodges, narrowly missing him thanks to Ajay's timely warning. Chang Feng falls backward, causing concern from Ajay and Xiaoyan. However, Chang Feng assures them he's fine and suggests that their group should escape while he buys time. With the death of the dungeon boss, the previously sealed dungeon had now opened, so they should leave while Chang Feng held off Liang. The undead servants of the protagonist attack Liang, and Chang Feng comments that Liang is completely controlled by the power of the contract mark. They shouldn't expect Chang Feng to buy them much time, so they need to flee quickly with Yanran in the meantime. Xiaoyan tries to say something to prevent Chang Feng from staying behind, but Ajay agrees that staying there would only be a burden for Chang Feng, so they decide to escape the dungeon, leaving him behind. Meanwhile, in the real world, 3 days had passed since the students entered the secret realm for their profession test. Since they hadn't returned and hadn't voted, parents confronted the school to find out what was happening and when their children would return from the test. The parents complained because the exam locations were always decided by the administration office, so they were owed an explanation about what was going on. A school representative asks them to calm down, explaining that the professional exam for students was never entirely safe. Even his daughter was still inside the test, and they should be patient while the examiners took time to figure out what had happened within the test area. Eventually, Suddenly, the examiners shout that someone is being teleported and that everyone should pay attention because someone is coming out of the dungeon. They realize it's Yenran and her group, and the students ask for help because she's injured and they urgently need paramedics. Yenran's father quickly rushes to her aid, concerned for his daughter's health. The examiners prepare to call for medical help, and Xiaoyan explains that Yenran exerted herself too much. Despite Xiaoyan's attempts to heal her, her level was still too low for the extent of her injuries. The examiners ask what happened inside the dungeon and where the rest of the students are. Ajay then explains that everyone else died, shocking the examiners. Of course, the parents were too far away to hear the conversation, and they start asking what's happening and who came out of the secret realm, complaining about their children not having returned yet. Seeing they would need to tell the truth, Yenran's father tells Chui-san, one of the examiners, to do the right thing and handle the consequences by telling the parents the truth and giving an explanation of what happened. Meanwhile, farther away from the parents complaining about their children's absence, two people are talking. One of them tells a guy named Sean that all those people who came out were a bunch of losers and not worth the wait, insulting everyone for no apparent reason. Sean agrees, thinking they acted like geniuses after hearing so much about them. In the middle of the conversation, a guy behind him comments that it seemed like either Kuching, probably the girl who talked about the double awakening before, was lying about someone with a double awakening existing in that school, or the person with a double awakening had died inside the dungeon. The guy remarks that they should just leave and return to Shishan because they came to that school to find the person with a double awakening. However, as she hasn't come out yet, they would take too much time. If they delayed more than necessary to return, they would end up receiving a lecture. But right at that moment when they were planning to leave, someone starts shouting that another person was coming out from inside the dungeon, and it was none other than Chang Feng himself who was now emerging from the dungeon. If you want part 2 of this work, just like the video and comment part 2. Until the next video, thank you.